Then from the back, a young employee stepped forward. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, his name tag barely hanging on. He swallowed hard before speaking. "I heard him," he said, nodding toward the manager. Before he called the cops, he said, "Watch her. She looks like trouble." A hushed gasp ran through the crowd. The manager's face darkened. "That's not true," he blurted out, too quickly. But the damage was done. Chief Daniels tilted her head, studying him. "So you judged me before I even spoke. Before I even had a chance." Her words were measured, but the weight behind them was undeniable. The young employee stepped forward again. "That's not all," he added hesitantly. "After you were handcuffed," he laughed. A sharp inhale swept through the onlookers. The room suddenly felt too small, too exposed. The truth wasn't just coming out, it was unraveling faster than anyone could control. The manager's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Chief Daniels exhaled slowly, then turned to the officers. "And you. Did you ever stop to question why you were really called?" Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Then, just when it seemed like the tension couldn't climb any higher, the store doors swung open. A new presence entered the room. Someone powerful. Someone who could change everything. And just like that, the night wasn't over. It was only beginning. The store doors swung open with force, and in walked a tall, commanding figure in a crisp suit. His sharp gaze swept the room, instantly demanding attention. The officers stiffened, recognizing him immediately. Deputy Commissioner Reynolds. His eyes landed on Chief Daniels, then flicked to the manager and the officers. "I got a call," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Seems we have a situation." The manager opened his mouth, but Reynolds held up a hand. "No, I don't want excuses." He turned to the officers. "You arrested your own chief. Without cause. Without asking questions. Do you have anything to say for yourselves?" One officer cleared his throat. We thought." "That was your mistake," Chief Daniels cut in, her voice unwavering. "You thought instead of asking. You assumed instead of investigating. That's not how we do this job." The weight of her words hung in the air. The officers looked down, their shame evident. The crowd watched, waiting for what would come next. Then, just when it seemed like the story had reached its peak, Reynolds turned back to the manager. "And you," he said coldly. "This isn't the first complaint we've had about you." The manager's face drained of color. "We'll be launching a full investigation into your hiring practices and past incidents," Reynolds continued. "And I strongly suggest you start looking for a new job." A murmur ran through the crowd. The young employee who had spoken earlier let out a breath of relief. Chief Daniels finally took a step forward, unlocking her gaze from the manager. But just as the tension began to ease, a voice from the back of the store spoke up again. "What about the others?" The judge's face drained of color. The prosecutor's hands shook. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Eleanor Graves is." "Gone?" The woman raised an eyebrow. "Funny. That's exactly what they wanted everyone to believe." A tense silence fell over the room. But before anyone could react, the back doors slammed open again. This time, uniformed officers entered. And the moment their eyes met Eleanor's, she knew. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The courtroom held its breath as the officers marched in, their faces unreadable. Eleanor remained still, watching them carefully. The judge, struggling to regain his composure, banged his gavel. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. One of the officers stepped forward, pulling out a file. "We received an urgent request to unseal classified documents related to Harrison v. State *," he announced. "It appears there was tampering." Gasps echoed through the room. Eleanor folded her hands, her expression unreadable. Tampering? The prosecutor choked out. The officer nodded. Evidence was buried. Testimonies were altered, and the one responsible for it. He turned to the judge. Was sitting on this bench the entire time. The courtroom erupted. The judge's face twisted in panic. "That's absurd," he shouted. But his voice cracked under the weight of the truth. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You tried to erase me," she said, meeting his eyes. "But justice has a way of finding its way back." The officers moved toward the bench. The judge's hands trembled as reality sank in. The man in the dark suit, an investigative attorney, placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Looks like you're not the one on trial after all." As the judge was led away, Eleanor turned to the stunned courtroom. "Shall we proceed with my case now?" she asked, a sly smile forming. The silence that followed was not of disbelief, but of awe. The tension in the courtroom slowly faded, replaced by something else: respect. The prosecutor, still in shock, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, in light of these revelations, I move to dismiss all charges." The substitute judge, who had been hastily called in, nodded without hesitation. Case dismissed. The gavel struck, but this time it wasn't a symbol of mockery. It was justice finally being served. Eleanor stood, gathering her worn shawl over her shoulders. As she turned to leave, the man in the dark suit stepped beside her. "You could come back, you know," he said quietly. "The law still needs people like you." She gave a small smile. "Maybe," she replied, "but for now, I think I've made my point." As she walked out, the courtroom remained silent, watching her go. No longer an old woman to be mocked, but a legend who had just reminded them all what true justice looked like. Everyone turned. "What do you mean?" Chief Daniels asked. The employee hesitated before finally saying, "He's not the only one who does this." A new silence filled the room, one heavier than before. Chief Daniels exchanged a glance with Reynolds. The problem was bigger than one person. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about something deeper. And just like that, a new battle had begun. Chief Daniels took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. She looked around the store, at the employees, the customers still watching, the officers now standing quietly. This wasn't just about her. It never had been. She turned to Reynolds. "We need to talk to them," she said, nodding toward the employees. "Every single one." He gave a firm nod in return. This wasn't ending here. It was only the beginning of real change. The store manager, still standing there, seemed smaller now. He knew there was nothing left to say. No excuse strong enough to undo what had been done. The officers, humbled and shaken, walked toward the exit, knowing their actions had consequences. As Chief Daniels left, she glanced back once. The store felt different now, like a place where truth had finally been spoken. And as she stepped outside, she knew one thing for sure. This city still had work to do, and she wasn't done yet.